First, to the recent ratcheting up, as I mentioned at the outset there, of the simmering political rivalry between Nigeria's two biggest political parties, the APC and the PDP, both claiming large chunks of political territory across Nigeria. But now the PDP accuses the APC of fomenting a crisis in its territory in an attempt to eat up its political space. But even as its politicians continue to defect, the PDP insists that its public backing is surging. And according to the political historian, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, before you dismiss this claim, remember the Second Republic, when the dominant political party of the time, the NPN, got many to decamp, but the decampees lost the support of their constituents and ended up not delivering. So should those concerned about the risk of today's APC forging a one-party state be looking back at the dynamics of 1978? Well, for his assessment, I'm joined now in the studio by the noted political scientist, Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, who is chair of the editorial board of Nigeria's Premium Times newspaper and senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Good to see you, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. The APC says the PDP is failing and is looking for an excuse to justify its failure. So rather than acknowledging that it is its own fault that it is failing, it is making the APC the scapegoat. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the evidence is clear that the crisis of the PDP has two basic sources. One is the determination of each faction within the party itself to be the preeminent faction that could control the party. And the second is the influence of the external factor, in this case the APC as a ruling party, that's enticing many within the PDP to decamp and join its fold, and thereby weakening, as it were, the PDP.
Well, they say, that's the APC, that all you've got to do is look at the PDP and you'll see that they are clearly fragmented, disorganized by problems they say started long before Mr. Tinubu became president. Do they have a point?
Yes, the PDP has had a crisis for quite some time, and the crisis has taken various dimensions. I think at the very beginning, the PDP expected to rule Nigeria for a very long time. I think they are the ones who mentioned 60 years initially, and that didn't happen. They lost power, and losing power in the context of the politics of Nigeria is a very destabilizing factor, because so many in the political class are there for what they can get from the state, what they can get from the government treasury, what they can extract from the ministries or agencies they've been asked to run. So when they lose power, they lose something fundamental to their whole motivation.
Somebody described it as the sale of the century. When
Exactly.
they lose, I mean, that's what it's all about. So
Yeah,
when they
yeah.
lose it, that sale is gone.
Yeah, so that's really the key crisis of Nigerian politics. People don't enter politics to serve the people. People enter politics to serve themselves. And serving themselves means essentially looting the treasury. So whenever a ruling party loses power, it affects it considerably. And the pull factor from the APC is only one dimension. The other dimension is the push factor from the pockets of those who have lost power, who want to be back in money, back in authority, back in flying around the world and enjoying the perquisites of power. So it's the combination of that push and pull factor that becomes very destabilizing on the party in question. So I'll agree with the APC. They are not the sole, they don't have sole responsibility for the crisis of the PDP.
So in that context, what do you see, what future do you see for the PDP, especially with 2027 fast approaching? I mean, the APC is gleefully saying that the prospects for coalition driven by the PDP don't look bright, because, I mean, PDP governors have already said they're not interested in a coalition. The party's National Working Committee are also distancing themselves from such a coalition.
Well, the PDP, as you know, is driven by three key factions. The most powerful influencer in the PDP is a minister in the APC government, the minister for the FCT. So he is a member of the PDP. He is a strong influencer, and many of the key officials of the PDP are beholden to him. The second faction in the PDP is the governors faction, and they themselves are not a cohesive factor, because some of them owe their loyalty to Wike and therefore would want to follow him, while other governors have their ambitions of their own. The third wing of the PDP is controlled by Atiku Abubakar, who has the hopes to use it as a platform for his 80th presidential campaign. So that's the power structure of the PDP itself. Is quite a divided party. And within this context, only a strong external crisis that they see as existential would force them to unite as a single party.
That's a good point. And of course, as you said, they are dividing in the sense that there's a lot of defections. I mean, we saw more from Enugu, and I think the people from Enugu were the Labour Party, but we also saw some from Cross River State defecting to the APC. I mean, just take us back in time, because I read your very interesting article, and I thought that was really very illuminating. Take us back in time to 1978 and Nigeria's Second Republic. What does that period tell us about what happens when a ruling party attempts to form a one-party state by trying to absorb opposition politicians into its ranks?
I think the first issue to note in terms of the Second Republic is that the process leading to the Second Republic, the military had indicated to the political class they'll prefer if they could all unite in one party and we'll have a one-party democratic state. That was the wish. That was already there in the speech of General Murtala opening the Constituent Assembly. So that was their will, and the politicians worked very hard to be in the same party. And the national movement was created. And in northern Nigeria, two key political actors, Aminu Kano of the radical NEPU and Taka of the UMBC, Joseph Taka, United Middle Belt Congress, agreed to team up with the group from the Northern People's Congress to have a united Northern Front, which they did. After that, they were able to convince the Southwest, the Southeast, and the South-South to all join in the national movement with the expectation that the entire political class will be in one party. But it was, in a sense, a pipe dream, because there was no basis for that. Because the thinking among Southern politicians was that the North had been in power in the First Republic, and there must be power switch. And therefore, definitely Zik himself, Awu and Co. all had presidential ambitions. So once 1978 came and the question of positioning for power arose, the national movement broke up and 5 parties emerged and contested the 1979 election. The National Party of Nigeria had the highest votes and was able to set up government, but it was a minority government in the sense that if the other parties, to use the term Shagari used at the time, ganged up against the MPN, then they could throw the MPN out of government because they only had a relative majority, and the others were stronger combined in the National Assembly. So what happened was that they set up a national government. It wasn't really national because only the MPP and the MPN joined in that government. After 2 years, that broke up. The strategy, therefore, of the MPN was to use what they call federal might to break up the other parties and destabilize them before the 1983 elections. And they went much further than what we are seeing today. One, they set up what they call the presidential liaison officer in each state in the country to supervise federal projects. And in northern Nigeria, that presidential liaison officer was called Kafi Gwamna. That is, you are stronger than the governor in the opposition because you carry the entire federal might. And they were quite disruptive to the operation of state governments. The second thing was to attract politicians from the other parties to decamp to the MPN. And they were able to entice quite a lot of the politicians. And by the time we went to the 1983 elections, the MPN was sure it will win with a massive majority. It didn't want a relative majority. It wanted an absolute majority, so that there would be no fear of gang up, as they called it. When the elections came to their shock, all these people who had decamped couldn't deliver their constituencies. Because people felt there was a profound sense of injustice. MPN, you are the ruling party. You are the most powerful. Why do you now create factions in all the 4 other parties, attract their people, bribe them with money, just to destabilize the parties and make it easier for we? So it backfired on the MPN, and they couldn't win with the type of majority they wanted.
They did win, though.
They did win. I mean, they got 10 points higher than they got in 1979 and 1983. But then they wanted to make sure they had inroads in each zone. And Ondo State was what they had targeted for their inroad in the southwest. And they got this Omoborio contest and put all the federal might behind him. And when the election came, he lost. But that was when the electoral system in Nigeria invented what we all know, which is rigging by declaration.
Right. So they basically imposed him on the state.
Yeah. So they counted the votes. He had lost. They brought new, what do they call it, this paper, the tally papers.
Yeah.
And rewrote new results. And we have that on judicial evidence because the Commission of Inquiry that was set up to investigate that crisis in Ondo State was categorical that a conspiracy between the Electoral Commission, called FEDECO at that time, Federal Electoral Commission, the Nigerian Police Force, the Nigerian Security Organization, which is what the DSS has now replaced, combined to rewrite that election results. So that, and the verdict was clear. The Nigerian state was implicated in compromising that election. And the bitterness of Nigerians at that state compromise in rigging elections was the sentiment the military used under General Muhammadu Buhari to have the coup 3 months later and take over power. So politicians should always be very careful about pushing the boundaries of using state power to oppress, to cheat, to manipulate. Because there is a tolerance level that people will say, no, we've had enough of that.
That's a fascinating history lesson there, and thank you for taking us back and going through it as clearly and comprehensively as you have. But can it be said that the APC is not necessarily poaching opposition politicians? I mean, they're suggesting that if you can't get your house in order, don't be surprised when your neighbor starts receiving your visitors. I think those were the words of one of Mr. Tinubu's special advisors, Daniel Bwala.
Well, I think the evidence for me is clear that the APC is poaching opposition members. They are enticing them. They are offering them positions. They are offering them resources. And that's the motivation that's pushing many of them to go. So Bwala can say what he wants, but the evidence we see clearly before us is that there is a clear attempt by the ruling party in conjunction with the federal government to attract, to take over leading opposition politicians and put them on their side of the bargain.
So, I mean, the option open to the PDP, I mean, it's trying to fix its house. It's set up a strategic committee. But it is also at the same time, because a lot of people are saying that because of the weakening of not just the PDP, Labour and all the rest of them, what they need is to come together as one cohesive force in order to take on the increasing might of the APC. If the PDP is at least publicly distancing itself from any coalition, where does this leave the likes of, I'm thinking of people like former Governor Nasser El-Rufai, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who appear to be the big champions of the proposed coalition?
You see, one of the things we haven't been able to crack in political science is when does the politician become rational? In a situation in which you have a party in power and collectively all of you in the opposition feel that party should be removed from power through the ballot box, what is rational is to agree on who will lead and you all team up behind that person. But the politicians will never team up against one person because too many of them all want to be president of this country.
Right.
So they each act in their own interest rather than their collective interest. And that's why often they are unable to achieve their objective. In this situation, things will change if the politicians become rational, that's the opposition politicians, and decide to come together behind one person who would stand for office. But if they all go their own separate ways, which is very likely, then we'll see a repeat of what we had seen in the past.
Well, now that we have the benefit of having you here, let me ask you what your reaction is to the news that we heard earlier today, that the House of Representatives has passed a bill to make voting mandatory. I don't know, I mean, I'm assuming you heard that piece.
Yes, well, I think it's not a bill that they have thought through, because first of all, they are making it punitive not to participate in an election, and I don't think citizens should be made to have an obligation to vote in an election. They should vote as a democratic right that they perceive they want to exercise the mandate that the Constitution gives them. We've seen countries that have mandatory voting, and for a lot of these countries, you are never able to get everybody to come and vote, even when there are punitive measures against them. Because it's a form of protest for somebody to say, look, I don't like all the politicians, and I'm going to sleep in my house rather than go and vote. That's your right as a citizen, that you feel the choices before you are simply not good enough, and you're not going to bother. So the issue about voting is for parties to bring very good candidates that will excite voters and encourage them to come out and vote because they have something to present, because they have a transformative agenda that will attract the citizen. A punishing attempt to have people vote by force, I think, is really not what we require in this country at this point in time.
On that note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Professor Jibrin Ibrahim is a noted political scientist, chair of the editorial board of Nigeria's Premium Times newspaper, and senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.